Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God our Father, and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, our gospel reading this morning continues Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, recorded in Matthew chapters 5 to 7. In the beginning of this Sermon on the Mount, the section called the Beatitudes, Jesus calls blessed those who are poor in spirit, those who realize that they are spiritually bankrupt and cannot do anything about it by themselves. Jesus calls them blessed because they rely solely on God's power to save. Right after these Beatitudes, God calls these same people the salt of the earth and the light of the world. There are great and glorious promises found in Jesus' words in these first parts of the Sermon on the Mount. Great and glorious promises that he speaks to us as believers in Jesus. He tells us that the kingdom of heaven is ours. Comfort will come to us, and so will peace. And these come by God's grace through faith in Jesus. But then you get to a section like the one this morning, and it might make you start to squirm just a little bit. In this section of our gospel reading this morning, Jesus talks about things that are present all around us, even in our own lives. Being angry with others, looking lustfully at others, divorce, ranking the oaths that we make according to what we swear by. Why is Jesus talking about these things? These words about murder, adultery, divorce, and taking oaths follow on Jesus' words about being salt and light. In verse 20, just prior to our gospel reading today, Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Jesus then follows these words by talking about the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Each one of these different teachings that Jesus presents in today's gospel reading start out in a similar way. You have heard that it was said, or something like that. Jesus is setting up a teaching moment to show how the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees falls short of what God truly desires. But he's also using this time to tell his disciples, including us, what the standards for spiritual greatness are as they and we live as salt and light. The same things that Jesus talks about in the first century are surely things that we struggle with even in our day and age. Nearly 2,000 years after Jesus first spoke these words. Jesus, in his teaching to the disciples, highlights an aspect of these particular standards of spiritual greatness that we too need to be reminded of from time to time. In the section on murder, Jesus highlights our relationships with other people. If those relationships are filled with anger and contempt and hate, we suffer in a spiritual sense as well. Jesus is reminding us that our relationships with others are not independent of our relationship with God. That's why Jesus says these words. If you are offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother. and then come and offer your gift. In other words, if you have sinned against a fellow Christian and he or she has something against you because of it, you cannot go to church and act as if nothing needs to be done about it. We cannot willfully disregard our own actions against others and stubbornly refuse to seek reconciliation with them. We are called to a standard of spiritual greatness because we are salt and light. Because we have received by faith salvation and life. We are called to share the peace of Christ with others. We are to seek reconciliation with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ because it is a reflection of God's love for us, who, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And Jesus' second item on this list of standards, he tackles adultery, stating that anyone who looks lustfully at another person is guilty of adultery in his heart. God's will is that people exhibit sexual purity in inner thought as well as outward deed. Impure thoughts are a radical danger to the life of discipleship. They were in Old Testament Israel, and they are even today for disciples of Jesus. The radical danger of impure thoughts requires radical action to be taken against it. So Jesus talks about plucking out your eye if it causes you to sin, or cutting off your hand if it causes you to sin. Losing an eye or a hand is no small thing. The leader is at pains to turn aside from the temptations and habits of sinful lust. Left unchecked, such desires can lead to damnation. And so we should be rid of such desires when they arise in our hearts. The third standard has to do with divorce. It was said also, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the grounds of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Divorce in first century Palestine was considered no big deal. Divorce was an available and acceptable option. The debate then centered on what is the right, what is the proper way to divorce one's spouse. What steps should be taken to ensure a measure of protection and future security is granted to the wife who is put away. Our present-day society often operates within this same debate. Divorce is an acceptable and available option. So what are the proper steps to take, even within the church, to make it valid and make it proper? But Jesus reveals the truth that marriage is more than some simple thing between people. Marriage is a union that God has created between two people. So Jesus categorically denies the validity of divorce, stating that it is never God's will or intention because it destroys that union that God has made. Divorce is a sin. And so Jesus equates it to forcing your ex-spouse into an adulterous relationship. So what are we to do with these words of Jesus? If we truly reflect on our own lives, we see that indeed we fall short of God's glory. We fall short of these standards of spiritual greatness as we carry out our calling as salt and light in the world. What are we to do? What are we to do when we fail? We turn to God. We turn in contrition and sorrow, repenting of our sins. The sin of hate or anger that we feel toward another person. The sin of adultery that we may have actually committed. The sin of the lustful desires that are brewing in our hearts and eyes. The sin of divorce. All these we lay at the feet of Jesus, for through God's Word and the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives, we recognize the sins in our own hearts and minds. And we turn to God in repentance and in sorrow, seeking His mercy and His grace. And God hears our cries for mercy. And He forgives us on account of Jesus, our Savior, who perfectly obeyed the law of God, so that the law was fulfilled on every count. And yet He was accused by men of violating God's law, and He was crucified because of it. But Christ's obedience extended to that very same cross where He obeyed the will of God, the will that He carried the guilt of our sins, our hatred and anger, adultery, lustfulness, divorce, and so much more. He carried all of our sins upon Himself, and He suffered the death that we deserved. Because of His perfect holiness, God the Father raised Him from the dead. The first in the resurrection that we look forward to, when our bodies will be fully gotten rid of that scourge of sin. In the meantime, we are called to live according to God's will, revealed in His Word. We are called to live according to the standards that He has established. God's law indeed is good. Why? Because by that law we know sin is sin. And so we are called to recognize sin as sin and repent of all the sins in our lives. We confess our sins before God our Father and receive His forgiveness for those very same sins. And we do that again and again and again. Not so that we can go out and sin with reckless abandon. We do it because we recognize that indeed we are poor in spirit. And our hope for salvation rests not in ourselves, but only in Jesus. In His name. We rise and confess together our faith in the Word and our sin. I believe in one